comes to the biggest external problems the group has yet faced. Kazu does more in this fight than Henry. The only thing Henry does is come up with the idea to use the alias card to save the partners, because, if nothing else, he's always a quick strategist. Henry is the worst of himself in these episodes, so it's no surprise that it hasn't worn off by the next one at all. He's so shaken up that he defaults on his pacifist beliefs and decides to charge in and defeat the Sovereign himself so he can send Susie home ASAP. Oh, and he does this.
Quiet!
Oh.
Henry? You're staying. I already told you, this place is gonna be very dangerous and you'd just be in the way. I don't know why you came here. A little girl is no use against Digimon. It's gonna have to be up to me alone, you got it?
Wow, were the Fox Kids censors asleep at the wheel during this show. It's hilarious. Henry's also so locked up in his own brain that he hasn't noticed Terriermon is seriously injured, and is completely ignoring the support of his own teammates. The result is a disaster that proves Henry's concern is less about the reality of keeping people safe, and more about his own internal ability to save them.
No, it's not your fault!
I shouldn't have pushed you to fight. I should have found another way. I was the one who failed you.
What are you, Henry, the center of the universe? What, you think the sun won't rise if you're not there to greet it or something?
What are you talking about?
Just look behind you, Henry.
Huh?
You don't have to do everything yourself. They're all here to help you. Let them.
He's desperate for control in a situation that's finally way too big for him to handle. I think it's safe to say it'd be too big for any adult to handle either, so he's just too hard on himself.
Guess your demanding big brother voice doesn't work so well, huh? Well, there's no way I can stop fighting if Susie's gonna be in danger.
Terriermon, you can't.
Once Henry admits that he needs to let go and trust other people, even his little sister, to be the real big man on campus, he biomerges with Terriermon and gets the power he wanted to make things right, coupled with the compromise of trusting his partner. And having to fight himself. Now there's an odd little detail. I mean, Henry permitted Terriermon to fight, but now he's doing the fighting himself, and Mega Gargamon is covered in guns, no less. Still, Henry, being the disciplined sort, prefers to resort to Tai Chi, in what is probably my favorite little detail of the show. He's in a body covered with missiles, and he fights using martial arts training. Badass! Now, just like Takado, Henry's pretty much reached the apex of his character at this point. But unlike Takado, he hasn't exactly changed all that much. Henry began as a kid beyond his years, already thinking and acting like an adult. What changed were his experiences and his coming to terms with what being an adult and standing up for his beliefs really meant.
Have you heard of creatures called devas? They're some kind of evil monsters.
Perhaps. In Sanskrit, there's an ancient legend about a group of good spirits, the devas. The old writings stated they battled the evil demon Asura, preventing him from fully entering the world and conquering it. Or at least that's how the legend goes.
The devas are good?
That's a difficult question.
How so?
Well, there were those that followed Asura, and they thought that the devas were evil.
So can you know what's true? Or do you just have to trust that what you're doing is right?
Very few things are absolute, Henry.
This is supposed to pertain to the Devas, as well as one of the overall themes of Tamers I'll talk about in part 3, but I think it applies to Henry as well. When he was little, before the series started, he was gifted, strong, and probably used to being right, so he thought undisputed power was the way to gain respect. His experiences taught him patience, wisdom, and responsibility, but his desire for control was still an issue by the time the series started, because as it turns out, Henry wasn't always right, and he wasn't always perfect. Nobody can be, because sometimes there's no perfect answer to a problem. You can only do the best you can to get by. Takado's strength was often his childish chance-taking, while Henry's was his mediation and peacemaking. He had the maturity and talents to assume control over a lot, but never as much as he thought he needed to handle to be a perfect adult. He needed to realize that even adults are flawed and have to learn to let go. And we'll talk about that a lot more when we get to Jonyu, but I think it's safe to say from the last episode that Henry's learned enough to stand on equal ground with his father. Or it would be, if the dub hadn't changed, perhaps the most moving growth in Henry's character to something unnecessarily depressing. I'll play it again in case you missed it in part 1.
Henry? I know it hurts now, son, but in time, it'll get better. You'll see.
In the dub, the implication is that nothing will ever be right again, and Jonyu will feel guilty over lying to his kid for the rest of his life. heartwarming. Weirdly enough, the original Japanese here was 1,000 times less depressing and much more meaningful. Originally, John Yu was telling Henry that he had every right to hate him for, well, let's count the problems. Using Terriermon and Henry without their knowledge, lying to them after they realized they'd been used. Also, he could go forward with a plan that would destroy the Digimon along with the D-Reaper. John Yu says that he doesn't have the right to ask Henry for forgiveness. Henry's response of shaking his head and smiling was not an extremely disturbing denial of forgiveness like it was in the dub. It was him cutting off his dad's self-hate parade to tell him he'd already forgiven him. Because at this point, Henry understands. He knows what it's like to do what you think is right with the best intentions and still screw up, or be forced to compromise just to barely get by. And he gets that that's true for everybody, even his dad, who he looks up to a lot. In a way, Henry's the adult he always wanted to be, not because he's changed, but because he understands the necessity of change and whatever that holds for him in the future. He'll probably end up being a stronger person than his father, but we'll talk about John Yu more later. It's high time we got to the most popular of the three leads, Rika Nonaka.